What exactly is happening in Madison? Ryan Harings of Locked On Badgers is here to discuss just that. Here's what is happening, Ryan, and I want to get your thoughts here before we talk about Wisconsin's most important transfer, of course. Sojourn Shelton is a former defensive back at Wisconsin and saw that a former running back from Wisconsin, James White, who I am indeed old enough, everybody, to have seen play in a Badgers uniform, just so we are clear, he was hired to be the running backs coach at Illinois, and Sojourn Shelton's wondering, well, why isn't he hired to Wisconsin? And suddenly the fan base is kind of stirring, wondering, why isn't he hired to Wisconsin? Luke Fickell, your take, Ryan, is what?
Much ado about nothing. And I am the biggest James White fan. Like, James White's a legend at Wisconsin. He helped us knock off #1 Ohio State. The student section used to hold up white sheets of paper when he would run. They called it the whiteout. Like, he was a big deal. Like, he is legit Wisconsin royalty. And we all know what he did in the NFL. He's incredible. And he's probably going to find success wherever he goes because that's what he's done his entire career in football. However, multiple things. This team is he got hired as an assistant running backs coach. His team is so far away from an assistant running backs coach solving the problems. Let's get a quarterback. Let's fix a pass rush and a defense that was dead last in the entire country in TFLs last year. Those are the issues. This doesn't solve anything. This is like a feel-good story that really doesn't solve any issues. So I think it's a much ado about nothing. And quite frankly, he got hired at Illinois with Brett Bielema. Brett Bielema was his head coach when he was at Wisconsin. That makes sense. There's a personal connection there. He doesn't have a personal connection to Coach Fickell. So I just don't think it's a big deal. I think people are mad because the program hasn't been performing well. And because it's not performing well, the optics of something like this don't look great. But I don't think he fixes any of the issues Wisconsin has. Like, he doesn't fix the fact that Braden Locke was our quarterback last year. Like, the assistant running back coach doesn't fix that. So I think it's much ado about nothing. I think it makes sense that he goes to Illinois where he has a personal connection with the head coach. And the last thing I would say is this program also needs to focus on the future. And I think James White's great. I don't think he would come in and disrupt chemistry or culture. But some former players have talked about Wisconsin needs to go back to what they were doing, what their roots were when they were successful. Well, you're not going to bring that into a locker room that's been a little struggling, right? Because now you might have a little bit of divide in the locker room. So I think on a bunch of fronts, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
So here's a couple of thoughts. I am not married, so I haven't been in marriage counseling or therapy before. But, you ever hear the expression, what are you really mad at? You yelled at him over not doing the dishes super well. What are you really mad at? That's how it rings to me when I hear the notion of getting mad at, why didn't they hire James White? Okay, are you really mad they didn't hire a former running back to be an assistant coach? Or are you just mad that the program hasn't been where you want it to be the last couple of years? That is the first thing. The second thing is on the defensive side of the ball, Ryan, now that Alex Grinch is no longer a part of the program, I have to imagine things are going to look up. I talked about him going to UCF last week on the show, and frankly, I was surprised he got hired to be a defensive coordinator again. But alas, here we are. And Scott Frost said, sure, come on down, be my defensive coordinator. Went great for the last offensive-minded head coach that hired him, of course. But for Wisconsin fans, this notion or suggestion, you got to get back to what makes Wisconsin good. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. I'm really not. You know what I'm a fan of, Ryan? Winning football games. I don't care what it looks like or who you are. Do you win or do you not win? When Oregon was looking for Dan Lanning, there was a big movement by Oregon alumni, Joey Harrington among them, who I haven't met but seems like an awesome guy, that were saying, hey, these coaches keep leaving. We got to hire an Oregon man. You got to hire a man of Oregon. It's like, you got to hire somebody who wins. If you're worried about him leaving, then give him an amount of money that makes you express to him very clearly, yeah, we want you to be here, stay here. Oh, look, Dan Lanning's now making $11 million a season. That's where I come down on any notion of you got to get back to the root. You got to do this because this is how we've done things. Well, no, you have to do whatever works for you as a head coach. That's how I see it.
Well, yeah, and let's take that going forward, too. How many times did Michigan spin their tires on a Michigan man before it eventually worked out with Jim Harbaugh, right? Like Brady Hoke, the Michigan guy, that did work. like when people say you have to get back to what you were doing, you know what the Badgers were doing is they were churning out first-round offensive linemen. That's what you got to get back to. That's what they're not doing now. You know what the Badgers were doing? They were churning out linebackers like TJ Watt and Van Ginkel and TJ Edwards and Ryan Connolly and ends like JJ Watt. That's why they were winning. It wasn't because like the Wisconsin way of culture. No, they were churning out NFL legit dudes and doing it playing in the Big Ten West. So when you say, let's go back to what we were doing, well, that division doesn't exist anymore. And you have to get better at just getting legit NFL talent. There's no secrets here. Right? You have to have NFL dudes. The Badgers may not have a guy drafted in the top 5 rounds this year. Hunter Wohler's part of their top pick. He's probably a 4th, 5th rounder as a safety. Like the great Wisconsin teams, and I say great because there were legitimately really good Wisconsin teams in the 2010 to 2020 range. They all had multiple first, second round picks. So when we say let's get back to what we're doing, that's not bringing in James White as an assistant running backs coach. That's bringing in NFL talent and developing it. And that's what's been missing. And that was missing at the end of the Paul Chryst era. Now, Luke Fickell's been here a couple years. He hasn't had a chance to develop his first recruiting class yet. So I think fans need to understand that this is going to take a couple years. If it works, we don't know if it's going to. But the answer isn't pulling former players back into the mold to try to coach somebody up. The answer is you got to get the talent that those former Badger teams have, and you have to give this staff time to develop their talent. So I'm fully with you. I don't think the answer is pulling back to old players.
I just don't like the suggestion that you should be stuck in the past or reliving the glory days. Like, do whatever is going to work. I'm not saying Wisconsin shouldn't try and be better in the trenches so that they can have a more effective run game, but that doesn't mean they need to line up with 12 personnel or 13 personnel all the time and hand the ball off 35 times to Melvin Gordon. It's 2025. You can open it up a little bit.
When you say line up in like 12 personnel, there are some glory days of Wisconsin. They went with a formation. These are some of the actual formations the Badgers used at this time. They had one called the Hippo, where they put multiple offensive linemen in the backfield. They had another one called the Barge, which is like 9 offensive linemen across the line of scrimmage and a Wildcat running back. I mean, there were some glorious moments of real man football back in the 2000s for the Badgers. But you're right. Like you brought in Luke Fickell because you recognize the need for modernizing this program. Now, whether or not he ends up being the right hire is ultimately to be decided. And the early returns haven't been great. And that's to your first part. That's why Badger fans are upset and they're frustrated, and rightfully so. But again, the answer is not we need to hurriedly hire a bunch of former players and try to recreate something that we're not recreating anymore because the Big Ten West isn't here and because we don't have that talent on the roster.
Ryan, I'm on a mission, and I need your help with this particular mission. I'm trying to figure out who every team's most important transfer is for a team to hit their ceiling in 2025. Who is that for the Wisconsin Badgers?
It's Billy Edwards Jr. It's Billy Madison, as he's being locally called by the strength and conditioning department of Wisconsin. It's that crazy red hair who we finally saved from the Maryland Terrapins and their offensive line struggles. Listen, it's the quarterback, right? Because a quarterback lifts all boats. It makes your receivers better, your running game better. It keeps your offense on the field, which limits the shots your defense can take, the body blows there. That's the obvious one. It's Billy Edwards Jr. And it's not to be great because what Wisconsin has had hasn't even been average at quarterback the last couple of years. Can he be average? A lot of people around the program think he can be. They're excited about just becoming stable at the quarterback spot. I said it on a previous squad show.
I'm really glad you said stable and not average. That was just not going to be a great soundbite. They're excited about being average.
Well, let's say this. Like, if you had a leaky roof, right, and every time it rains, it leaks, and if things are falling through, there's a bird coming through, just getting to, like, average rain protection is a pretty good thing. Like, just getting to the point where there's a piece of plywood over the hole.
Yeah.
Right?
Can we stop having to put a bucket in the corner of the living room?
That's a big deal. So let's go solid, but yeah, solid, average, stable, whatever you want to call it. Just getting to that middle of the pack in the Big Ten is a big deal for Wisconsin because they were 17th in the Big Ten in passing efficiency last year. So it's Billy Edwards Jr. If you want to go one more quick one, you probably go Tanner Koziel, big time tight end get out of the MAC, had 94 receptions last year, which the Badgers have not had a really strong tight end in that room in a couple of years. So that should pair well with Billy Edwards Jr. But I would go with those two. But certainly Billy Edwards Jr. is the key to this offseason.